In this thrilling tale, one human's unexpected act of mercy on a dying alien soldier sparks a chain of events that could shatter a galaxy-wide conspiracy. Explosive battles, daring infiltrations, and a quest for truth pit our unlikely allies against powerful forces bent on fueling endless war. Every twist raises the stakes, driving us toward a showdown that will determine whether peace can triumph over greed. Will their courage and unity be enough to expose the corrupt masterminds manipulating both sides and bring hope to countless worlds? Tune in to the full story to witness the heart-pounding action and discover how it all ends. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you never miss an update and can enjoy more exciting stories just like this one. Cade squinted through the porthole of his battered salvage vessel, the Wayfarer, as it drifted among the fractured remnants of a once mighty war zone. Shards of twisted metal and ragged ship hulls floated lazily in the vacuum, illuminated by the distant glow of stars. The ceaseless war between humanity's coalition and the alien Feliri Dominion had reduced this sector to a ruin of silent echoes. Cade had seen more than his fair share of these aftermaths, first as a military medic, and now as a scavenger, eking out a living on the edges of legality. A lifetime ago, he had volunteered to protect the frontier worlds from Feliri incursions, never imagining how quickly ideals could fade when faced with the unrelenting grind of combat and loss. He turned to the ship's integrated AI, Zora, whose voice emanated from speakers mounted around the cramped cockpit. "Zora, run a systems check," he said, keeping his own voice low out of habit. The AI responded with mechanical precision, though a faint note of concern was threaded into her tone. Zora, coded with advanced empathy protocols, had proven herself more companion than tool during these lonely excursions. "Life support is stable, Cade," she replied. "Power at 32% capacity. Thrusters nominal. Long-range sensors are picking up residual radiation from last week's battle. I'm also detecting higher-than-average debris density in Quadrant 6. Cade sighed and ran a gloved hand over his unshaven jaw. This conflict, lasting nearly a decade, had ground entire star systems under its heel. It wasn't always so widespread. Rumors hinted that corporate interests, companies like Aurora Tech, had fanned old grudges into fresh flames, ensuring there would be no swift resolution. The Coalition and the Feliri Dominion, locked in an unending cycle of retribution, blindly fed the machine that thrived on their mutual hatred. Cade had once believed that might just be paranoia or conspiracy theory, but the more wrecks he visited and the more unusual anomalies he saw, the harder it became to dismiss those rumors. One particular piece of debris on the scanner display drew his attention. A large vessel, once an impressive Feliri warship, by the look of its elongated design, floated far from the main wreck clusters. Its battered hull flickered with faint energy surges, which suggested pockets of functioning systems somewhere inside. Cade leaned forward, black market ocular implants scanning for any sign of a salvage claim. None of the Coalition or Dominion retrieval teams seemed to have marked it yet. "Looks like no one's gotten there first, Zora," Cade said, tapping coordinates into the console. "Send out a basic ping, just to check if it's truly derelict." Zora did so, and the ping returned emptiness, muffled by interference. The warship was apparently still afloat, but no official beacons beckoned. This could mean top-tier salvage, rare metals, alien tech for black market buyers, or it could mean something far more lethal waiting inside. Cade felt that old prickle of excitement and anxiety combine in his gut. With the war raging on, decent salvage was the only thing keeping him from sinking into debt he'd never escape. "I'll bring her in," he muttered, engaging thrusters for a careful approach. "Let's see if this old wreck is going to pay my bills this month." As the Wayfarer crept closer, the looming wreck became more intimidating. Its hull blackened by plasma scorching and riddled with gashes that revealed mangled support structures within. Shredded compartments dangled precariously, linked only by twisted girders. The vessel's once elegant lines, characteristic of Feliri design, were now hideously deformed by raw explosive force. Cade's hands tightened on the maneuvering thrusters as he threaded the path through drifting shards of hull plating and shredded starfighter pieces. He'd seen countless wrecks during his days with the Coalition Medical Corps, patching up wounded humans and occasionally capturing injured Feliri during intense frontline skirmishes. Back then, it was all about saving the person in front of you, no matter the species. But the rest of the polyester had no such nuance. The killer be killed dogma had infected everyone, from top brass to rookie recruits. Disgusted with the endless body count, Cade deserted under tenuous circumstances. He later found that scouring battlefields for salvage at least allowed him to choose who he helped, or didn't help, without the burden of official orders. Zora's computerized voice broke through his musings. Cade, the radiation in this sector is spiking. I advise a quick reconnaissance. Full hazard protocols might be needed. Understood, Cade replied, running a practiced eye over the suits in his storage compartment. He grabbed his best exosuit, mentally noting that its filters needed replacement soon. He pulled it on, tested the seals, and donned the helmet. The heads-up display lit up, showing local air quality C0, temperature frigid, and hazardous material detection. The outer hull docking clamp whined as it latched onto a relatively stable portion of the wreck. Cade engaged his mag boots, then entered the airlock. A hiss of decompression preceded the heavy metallic thud as the outer door slid open. Immediately, he stepped onto a scorched walkway bridging a jagged hole in the Filiri warship's hull. The silence of space pressed in, broken only by his own breathing and the faint hiss of oxygen feeds. The beam of his suit's headlamp cut through the darkness, illuminating swirling motes of dust that sparkled in the vacuum. Moving forward carefully, Cade checked for structural stability. He often marveled at how eerily still these vessels became in the aftermath of a fierce battle. Oddly, there were no drifting bodies or remains here, though scorch marks and twisted corridors suggested fierce fighting had taken place. Security doors hung limp on their hinges, and shattered display panels winked with intermittent sparks. He whispered into his comm, "Zora, keep a channel open." "Copy that," she answered. "Comm link established. I'm running passive scans to detect any life signs, but the radiation is disrupting clear readings." Strangely uneasy, Cade advanced deeper into the wreck. His exosuit's sensors chimed softly when they detected a faint cluster of life support signals. It appeared the warship's secondary generator still operated at minimal capacity, powering a narrow band of corridors. A flicker of movement at the edge of his headlamp made him freeze. But when he looked again, there was nothing. Warily, he set off once more, a slow prowl through claustrophobic passages littered with alien script and half-functional lighting. A tingle crept along the back of Cade's neck when his proximity sensor flashed. According to the battered scanner in his hand, a single life sign flared faintly in the direction of what might once have been the warship's command center. Twisting aside a warped blast door, Cade found a route leading deeper into the vessel. Each step echoed ominously, lending a surreal quality to the silent labyrinth. He paused near a collapsed portion of corridor, shining his headlamp over buckled plating. A streak of luminescent turquoise fluid caught his eye. Filiri blood, still faintly glowing. From his time as a combat medic, Cade knew enough about Filiri biology to realize it retained its bioluminescent properties for hours after exposure to air. Someone was alive here not long ago. Heart pounding in a mix of dread and curiosity, he followed the trail. The luminous droplets formed a wobbling line that led into a storage compartment half buried under debris. There, in a corner behind broken crates, lay the figure of a wounded Filiri. She was curled on her side, coppery skin shimmering whenever her labored breathing quickened, her elongated limbs trembling in the flickering light. A disruptor pistol, clearly alien in design, was clutched in one hand, though her grip looked feeble. Seeing him, her brilliant silver eyes narrowed with unmistakable malice. She pointed the pistol shakily. Her voice, when it came through Cade's suit speakers, was hoarse but laced with defiance. "Stay back, human." Cade froze, well aware that a single shot from a disruptor could puncture even the best exosuit. He slowly raised his free hand, letting his salvage cutter dangle from the other. "Easy," he said in an even tone. "I'm not coalition. Not here for a fight." The Filiri woman's gaze flicked to the environment around her, the ruined warship, and then back to him. She exhaled in short, ragged bursts. Cade's eyes took in the deep plasma burn across her torso. Without immediate care, she would bleed out. Despite her precarious condition, the pistol remained pointed at him. He measured his options. He could kill her and claim a hefty bounty if her rank proved high enough. The coalition paid well for Filiri officers. But as he watched her struggle for each breath, Memories of those he'd failed to save on both sides rose unbidden, casting a heavy shadow over him. The easiest path was not always the right one. With slow, cautious movements, he set his cutter aside and reached for a multi-purpose medical kit latched to his thigh. Her eyes flickered with confusion as he extracted a hypo spray of universal coagulant. "Either you let me help you," he said in a calm, quiet voice, "or you'll be dead in an hour." She gritted her teeth, forcing herself to remain conscious. "Why would a human help me?" Cade shrugged, a hint of sadness in his expression. "Not all of us want to keep this war going. Now hold still. This is going to hurt, but it'll buy you time." The hiss of the hypo spray was followed by a sharp gasp from the alien woman. She tried to jerk away, but only managed to flinch, as if her strength were nearly spent. The coagulant took effect swiftly, stabilizing the bleeding. Cade keyed a diagnostic routine on his scanner and noted multiple organ traumas. She'd need more advanced treatment soon, or that wound would still be fatal. At that moment, Zora's voice crackled in Cade's earpiece. "Alert. Coalition patrol vessel has entered scanning range. They're broadcasting standard sweep protocols. It looks like they're investigating the recent battle." Cursing under his breath, Cade looked down at the wounded Faliri. She studied his face through his visor, uncertain whether he was about to turn her in. Time seemed to condense into a single urgent moment. If the Coalition found them, they'd arrest him for desertion, or kill them both on sight if they realized he was aiding a Faliri. He knew what he should do. Hand her over, collect a bounty, maybe clear his name. Yet the thought of it turned his stomach. "Can you stand?" he asked, tucking away his scanner. She gave a short, bitter laugh that dissolved into a coughing fit. "I don't think so," she managed to rasp. Slinging his arm under her shoulders, Cade hefted her up with a grunt. Though lean, she had a wiry muscle structure typical of Faliri, making her heavier than he expected. Leaning against him, she gave only weak protest. The disruptor pistol hung limp at her side, her energy spent. They navigated back through the labyrinth of damaged corridors, Cade carefully selecting passages that would lead them to the breach in the hull where the Wayfarer was docked. In the distance, muffled thuds and tremors reverberated, possibly the Coalition's salvage teams boarding other sections of the warship. The stale, metallic smell of burned circuits clung to everything. "I'm Lore," the Faliri finally muttered, when it became clear he wasn't going to shoot her. Though her voice was still laced with pain, a flicker of curiosity crossed her features. "Cade," he answered, huffing as he helped her over twisted beams. "Hold on. We're almost out of here." It felt surreal, carrying a wounded enemy officer while Coalition patrols roamed the ship. Yet something in Cade's mind had shifted. Perhaps it was the memory of dying soldiers he'd once tried to save, or maybe it was a spark of stubborn compassion. War had consumed years of his life, and in the end, he'd walked away from it, determined never to harm another living soul unless forced. At last, they reached the jagged hull breach. Lore trembled, her eyes fluttering. Cade engaged his suit's comm. "Zora, prepare for emergency launch. I'm bringing someone aboard." Zora's reply was immediate. "Understood." Coalition presence intensifying. "We must be swift." Hauling Lore through the void between the Faliri wreck and his own vessel felt like crossing a chasm of nightmares. Pieces of debris swirled around them, lit by the fitful flashes of battered starship fires burning on minimal oxygen. Cade's thrusters sputtered as he guided them carefully, mindful of the precious cargo in his arms. Lore's limp form shuddered with each movement, but she clung to consciousness, her silver eyes occasionally locking onto Cade's visor as though trying to decipher his motives. Once they were secured inside the Wayfarer's airlock, the doors sealed, and Zora began pressurization. Alarms chimed from the cockpit as the main console registered an incoming Coalition fighter detachment. "They're scanning us," Zora announced urgently. "They must have noted the unusual heat signature from our docking clamp." Cade cursed. "Oh, no. We'll detach now. Set a course for the Farron Belt. Plenty of asteroids to hide among." Zora's engines rumbled as they pulled away from the crippled warship. The Coalition's presence loomed larger on the sensors, two fighters already sweeping in for close-range inspection. Cade stumbled toward the medbay, where he carefully set Lore down on a fold-out exam berth. The small compartment was a testament to Cade's salvage lifestyle. Old medical supplies stacked in crates, a half-functional diagnostic scanner perched on a trolley. Lore's breathing rasped unevenly. Her coppery skin, shot through with veins of faint bioluminescence, shone with sweat. The coagulant had slowed her bleeding, but internal injuries were another matter. Hang in there, Cade murmured, rummaging for a pain suppressant in an alien-compatible antibiotic kit. He remembered just enough from his medical training to know how precarious her condition was. She blinked at him, disoriented. "Why?" she whispered. "You could have left me to die." "And maybe I should have," Cade said grimly. "But I couldn't, not after everything I've seen." Any further discussion was cut off by a jolt that ran through the Wayfarer. Red lights flared on the overhead panel. Zora's voice sounded over the loudspeaker, tight with urgency. "Incoming fire!" One of the Coalition fighters opened a warning shot. "I'm charting a jump to faster than light. It's risky with the radiation storm nearby, but we have little choice." "Do it!" Cade barked. Rushing to the cockpit, he strapped himself into the pilot's seat and engaged the Wayfarer's hasty FTL spool-up, ignoring the frantic beeping that indicated the engine was dangerously close to meltdown from the forced jump. The starfield outside the cockpit stretched into eerie lines of color as the ship lurched forward, catapulting them away from the immediate threat. When they finally stabilized in the swirling emptiness between star systems, an exhausted hush fell over the cockpit. Cade glanced over his shoulder toward the small med bay. Lore needed more advanced care, but at least for the moment, they were out of immediate danger. "We'll hide in the Farron belt and patch her up," he told Zora, keeping his voice low. "But something tells me this is only the beginning of our problems." Zora responded quietly, "I concur. There's no going back now, Cade. You've saved an enemy officer. We've just entered a new frontier, one that may place us in danger from all sides." Cade exhaled, weary and uncertain of what fate lay before him and his unexpected guest. The war might still rage on, but in that instant, he found a fragile sense of resolve. He would help Lore survive. Perhaps, in doing so, he'd also find a path towards something greater than the endless cycle of bloodshed he had tried so hard to escape. The Wayfarer dropped out of FTL on the outskirts of the Farron belt, a sprawling labyrinth of rock and ice that orbited a dim star. Cade guided the ship deeper into the belt until he found a relatively calm pocket where they could remain undetected. He set the engines to minimal power and dimmed the lights in the cockpit. When he stepped back into the medbay, his heart lurched. Lore lay on the exam berth, her pallor dulled by pain and fatigue, though her eyes snapped open at his approach. "We're safe for the moment," he said, easing onto a rickety stool beside her. The hum of environmental systems filled the silence between them. "I won't lie, I'm no expert in Fillyri anatomy, but I'll do what I can. You'll have to guide me." She winced, jaw clenching. Her voice, though weak, carried the same stubborn determination as before. "Tell me your plan. We can't run forever, and if the Coalition tagged your vessel, they'll track our jump coordinates." Cade exhaled, running fingers through his unruly hair. He'd been so focused on getting away that he hadn't thought beyond the immediate crisis. "I know a place," he said finally, recalling rumors of an old smuggler outpost orbiting a rogue planet just beyond the belt. He had never set foot there himself. Rumor had it the station was a safe haven for people who wanted no involvement in the war. "We'll slip under the radar, find you proper medical help. Maybe we can figure out why the Coalition was so determined to board that wreck. Something about it didn't feel right." Lore's expression hardened with memory, and her lips tightened as if fighting off a wave of agony. "That ship carried more than ordinary troop deployments. We had intelligence on corporate infiltration. My squad was investigating covert alliances between the Dominion's high command and certain human-run conglomerates. The last transmissions we intercepted implied that profiteers were supplying weapons to both sides, fueling the war indefinitely." Cade froze, mind reeling as her words dredged up half-formed suspicions he had long buried. He had heard whispers of private weapons manufacturers meddling in political affairs, encouraging escalation. But hearing it confirmed by a Fillyri officer was a sobering jolt. "You're sure about this?" he asked quietly. She pressed her eyes shut, as though gathering strength to speak. "We discovered enough to warrant an emergency retrieval. That's why my ship was targeted, I'm certain." A pang of guilt coursed through him. If what she said was true, the entire conflict might be orchestrated. Had all those battles, all that death, been meaningless beyond lining some fat cat's pockets? The notion made his stomach churn. Looking down, he realized he was still holding Lore's hand from when he checked her pulse. Her fingers tightened around his in a subtle display of trust. "All right," he said softly, glancing at Zora's camera lens mounted near the ceiling. "Zora, scan the local star chart for that rumored outpost. If we're going to blow the lid off this conspiracy, we'll need allies." Zora acknowledged him with a muted chime. As the AI began her work, Cade set himself to the makeshift surgical table, carefully applying an alien-safe regenerative salve he had once bartered from a traveling merchant. Though Lore hissed in pain, she didn't pull away. Something unspoken had shifted between them, a fragile sense of solidarity that neither dared acknowledge fully, but both silently accepted as their only hope for survival. They arrived at the hidden outpost 2 days later, slipping through the fringes of the Farron Belt at minimal engine output. Cade's sensors revealed a cluster of rough-hewn modules clinging to a chunk of barren rock orbiting a rogue planet. The station was a patchwork of hull segments, shipping containers, and old docking rigs, assembled over years by smugglers and refugees. The place was known simply as Whisper Station, more rumor than established port. If the place still had inhabitants, they were keeping quiet. No standard beacons greeted them, nor did any patrol vessels appear to chase them off. While it was risky to dock without clearance, Cade saw no other choice. Lore's breathing had grown increasingly labored, and the salve he applied could only do so much for internal injuries. "Powering down thrusters," he murmured, sweat beading on his forehead. The docking clamp bit into the station's outer ring with a harsh metallic clang. A short hiss followed as the airlock aligned with a rusted corridor that led into the station. Moments later, Cade helped Lore into a portable environment suit tailored to her slender, elongated limbs. He'd scrounged it from one of his old salvage crates. It wasn't a perfect fit, but it would keep her stable. She insisted on walking, refusing to let him half-carry her. The single-minded stoicism he'd once despised in Infiltrating soldiers now impressed him. War had taught them both how to endure, but her determination exceeded any he had witnessed. The airlock opened onto a dismally lit passage. Thick cables snaked along the walls and emergency lights flickered. Following the corridor, Cade used the beam of his helmet lamp to spot a battered sign covered in scrawled graffiti reading, "Whisper Station, welcome or get lost." Soon they emerged into a larger chamber, part marketplace and part scrapyard. Scavenged items lay in haphazard piles, guarded by nervous-looking merchants of various species, humans, a handful of reptilian sarth, and even one towering insectoid lurex picking through electronics with twitching mandibles. Conversations halted as Cade and Lore limped past. Suspicion glimmered in every gaze, but nobody made a move. In a place like Whisper Station, mutual survival trumped curiosity. At the far end stood a makeshift infirmary sign, a flickering red cross stenciled onto a hull plate. Cade motioned Lore forward. Inside, they found a cramped medical bay staffed by a single figure, an older man with mechanical eyes and patchy hair. He wore a stained jacket that might once have been a doctor's uniform. "Help us," Cade said, not wasting time on pleasantries. "She's badly injured." Without a word, the old man directed them to a cot. Lore's eyes fluttered shut the moment she lay down, exhaustion finally overtaking her. The man's mechanical gaze flicked between Cade and Lore, reading every detail. Then he grunted and began preparing instruments. "She's Filiri, isn't she?" he said, not looking up from a battered medical scanner. Cade nodded. The old man slid a fresh power cell into the scanner and ran it along Lore's torso, unimpressed by the revelation. "This station doesn't have a prejudice policy," he muttered dryly. "But I'll need payment up front." Cade handed over a small pouch containing nearly all the credits he possessed. The man counted them, scratched his stubbly chin, and seemed to decide it was enough. "Name's Ross," he finally said. "Let's see if we can't patch her up. After that, you can tell me your story, because folks here don't give money away for free without expecting something in return." Over the next 48 hours, Ross worked with gruff efficiency, administering a mix of black market meds and advanced nanites that Cade never could have found on any legitimate station. Each day, Lore's color improved. Her eyes no longer rolled with feverish pain, and she even managed a strained laugh when Cade recounted an old frontier tale to distract her. Meanwhile, Cade took cautious trips through the corridors of Whisper Station, searching for supplies, checking ship parts, and making inquiries in hushed tones about corporate interference in the war. He caught wind of a rumor. A shadowy consortium named Omnitech was funneling weapons to both the Coalition and the Filiri Dominion. Stories whispered of cargo ships seen carrying contraband to Dominion outposts, then reappearing at coalition bases under different flags. If these rumors were accurate, Omnitech was stoking the conflict's flames, likely to profit from the ongoing carnage. During Lore's final day of treatment, Ross summoned Cade to the infirmary. The old medic's expression was unreadable behind his mechanical eyes. He waved Cade closer to Lore's cot, where she sat propped up by pillows, looking markedly better, though still frail. "I heard you're sniffing around about Omnitech," Ross said evenly. "Dangerous subject. People who ask too many questions have a way of disappearing in these parts." Cade's gut tightened. "I need answers," he replied, voice low. "We believe there's evidence linking Omnitech to conspiracies on both sides. Lore's unit found something, some kind of coded data that could expose them." A flicker of interest crossed Ross's face. "That might be, but if it exists, it's well hidden. Omnitech has connections in every major starport across the frontier and a fortress of an HQ in the heart of Coalition space. Good luck getting near it, let alone prying out the truth." From the cot, Lore cleared her throat. The effort cost her, but her voice remained firm. "My people suspect the Dominion's high command is compromised. If Omnitech has ties to them, it means traitors on my side. And from what Cade tells me, the Coalition might be in the same mess. If both governments realize they're being played, they might end the war," Cade finished, glancing at her. Ross gave a sardonic laugh, folding his arms. "Ending a war is no simple task. But if you two want to try exposing these corporate schemers, you'll need resources, and you'll need to act fast." Word is a Coalition unit recently landed on a neighboring asteroid, searching for a certain deserter with a Falleri fugitive. A chill ran down Cade's spine. It hadn't taken them long to track him, after all. He muttered a string of curses under his breath. "Then we can't stay here." Ross nodded, handing Cade a battered data chip. "This station has eyes and ears. I grabbed intel on troop movements. Your best bet is to slip away in the confusion when they come knocking. That chip also contains coordinates for a safe harbor used by rebels, people who want peace more than war profits. They might have the resources you need to blow this thing wide open." Whisper Station's once quiet corridors were abuzz with tension that evening. News of the Coalition detachment spread like wildfire, and many of the more unsavory denizens began packing up their illicit wares. Cade and Lore likewise prepared for a hasty departure. Ross's data chip gave them an escape route, but getting to their ship was another matter. Coalition squads could arrive at any moment, sealing off the docking bays. "We don't stand a chance if we get cornered," Cade told Lore as she slipped into a newly acquired exosuit, courtesy of Ross. The old medic had bartered an older model from a passing scavenger in exchange for some medical supplies. It was still far better than the ragged environment suit she'd been using. She checked the settings, a glimmer of gratitude in her eyes. "I won't slow you down." Through a small porthole, Cade could see docking lights flickering against the station's hull. He pressed his ear to the corridor door, hearing the shuffle of frightened voices beyond. With a soft beep, Zora's voice chimed through his wristcom. "Cade, the station's external sensors show 2 Coalition cruisers approaching. They'll be within boarding distance in under 15 minutes. We should leave now." He motioned for Lore to follow. They stepped into the labyrinth of metal walkways that wound around the outpost. The stale air reeked of ozone and fear as station inhabitants hustled to hide or flee. Cade navigated by memory of his earlier supply runs, leading them on a winding path that avoided the main thoroughfares. If the Coalition had landed, they'd likely secure the major corridors first. Halfway to the Wayfarer, they encountered a sealed blast door. From the other side echoed the bark of orders and the heavy tromp of boots. Cade and Lore exchanged a tense look. Going through that door meant certain confrontation. A cluster of wide-eyed smugglers cowered nearby, muttering curses. "Is there another route to the docking bay?" Lore asked them, speaking softly so as not to provoke panic. A lanky man in an oil-stained jumpsuit pointed with a trembling hand down a side corridor. "Maintenance tunnels. Lead around, but it's dark. No guarantee they're passable." "It'll have to do," Cade said, mind already racing. The next moment, the blast door began to creak open from the other side. Coalition soldiers were forcing it, prompting some of the smugglers to scatter. Cade grabbed Lore's arm, and they sprinted into the side corridor just as the main door slid open, revealing an imposing squad of uniformed troops. A hurried, twisting run brought them to a rusted hatch marked Maintenance Tunnel 16B. Cade wrenched it open, shining his suit light onto a steeply descending ladder. A pungent smell wafted up, like stale coolant and decaying metal, but at least it was deserted. They climbed down, ignoring the protest of their muscles. Lore's breath came quick, but she kept pace, her face set with fierce resolve. At the bottom, the tunnel branched in several directions. Cold sweat pricked the back of Cade's neck. One wrong turn, and they'd be lost in the station's bin, but turning around meant certain capture. With no time to deliberate, they picked a path that sloped upward, hoping it led to the docking ring. After what felt like an eternity, wading through damp corridors and stepping over old machinery, the tunnel ended at an unmarked hatch. When Cade cautiously pried it open, they emerged onto a silent catwalk overlooking a dingy hangar bay. The overhead lights flickered, revealing only a single figure pacing among the docking clamps, a coalition officer, his posture stiff with authority. He wore a sleek navy blue uniform, the red insignia of a captain gleaming on his shoulder. Cade drew back, heart pounding. Lore tensed at his side. Could they make it to the Wayfarer without alerting that officer? If he'd come alone, it might mean the rest of the squad was guarding another entrance, or possibly searching the station. Glancing around, Cade spotted his ship at the far side of the bay, an enticing silhouette amid the gloom. A short catwalk connected to a metal staircase that spiraled down toward the deck. He raised a finger to his lips, motioning to Lore for silence. They eased onto the catwalk, footsteps light on the metal grates. The plan was simple: slip down to the floor and reach the Wayfarer before the officer noticed. But fate had other ideas. Halfway across, a loose panel under Cade's boot rattled with a deafening clang. The coalition officer's head snapped up instantly. His hand drifted toward the sidearm at his hip. "Halt! Identify yourselves!" In the stuttering light, Cade recognized that face. It belonged to Lieutenant Hale, a by-the-book officer from Cade's old unit. Hale's eyes widened as he registered Cade's features, followed by a flash of fury. "You!" He lunged for his comm unit, presumably to call reinforcements. Cade and Lore had no choice but to run. They bolted across the remaining stretch of catwalk. Hale fired a warning shot from his pistol, a bright bolt slashing the air, but it missed by a hair's breadth, scorching the rail behind them. Lore vaulted over the rail, landing gracefully on the deck below. Cade hastily climbed down a short ladder, ignoring the pain that flared in his joints. Hale's voice thundered through the bay, echoing off metal walls. "Stop! Desertion and treason are punishable by death, Cade." But Cade and Lore pressed on, hearts hammering. The Wayfarer's hatch was so close. Suddenly, more footsteps pounded from the corridor. Additional coalition soldiers poured into the hangar, boxing them in. Gunfire streaked across the bay, forcing them to duck behind a cargo crate. The acrid scent of scorched metal and ozone filled the air. With no time to plan, Cade keyed his wristcom. "Zora, override the ship's external locks and depressurize Dock 2 now." A shrill alarm blasted through the hangar, and the overhead bay doors began to crack open. Air rushed toward the opening, creating a violent wind that ripped crates in loose gear toward the vacuum of space. Coalition troops scrambled for safety. Hale clung to a railing, shouting into his comm for backup. Amid the swirling chaos, Cade and Lore made a desperate dash for the Wayfarer. They dove through the hatch as the outside pressure dropped further. The door slammed behind them. Zora wasted no time initiating engine startup. The Wayfarer tore free from its docking clamps, pitched upward, and slipped into open space while the station's defense turrets were still fumbling to orient. Breathless, Cade collapsed into the pilot's seat. Lore, gripping the co-pilot console, let out a ragged sigh of relief. The swirling mass of the Farron belt loomed before them once more. Pursuit was inevitable, but they had evaded immediate capture. Heart pounding, Cade gazed at Lore. "Looks like we have no choice now but to seek out those coordinates Ross gave us. Whatever we find there may be our only chance to expose omnitech, and possibly end this damn war." She nodded, her gaze fierce. "Then let's finish this." 2 days of tense FTL travel brought the Wayfarer into orbit around a barren world bathed in the ruddy glow of a nearby red giant star. A ring of automated defense satellites circled this forsaken place like silent sentinels, their vigilance a testament to the station hidden on the surface below. According to the data Ross had provided, this was the safe harbor for a ragtag band of rebels, both humans and Filiri, who harbored the same goal, ending the war that had taken so many lives. Cade stared at the planet's scorched surface, an unsettling mix of excitement and dread swirling in his gut. If these rebels truly aimed to unify those who opposed corporate manipulation, it might give him and Lore the resources to pull off the impossible. They descended through a haze of dust storms. Tornadoes of grit and small debris occasionally rattled the Wayfarer's hull, though Zora's stabilizers kept them steady. A series of coded pings guided them to a metal-hulled dome nestled at the bottom of a canyon. Cade set the ship down on a pad ringed by floodlights, their harsh beams piercing the blowing dust. Waiting for them was a cluster of armed figures wearing mismatched armor over tattered uniforms, an immediate sign that this was no normal militia. Each bore unique insignias from various branches of coalition or Dominion forces, some crossed out or altered as a statement of rebellion. The leader stepped forward, a tall woman with an artificial left eye and a quiver of throwing blades strapped across her back. She signaled for Cade and Lure to disembark, scanning them with an expression that combined caution and curiosity. "I'm Commander Silva," she said, her voice carrying the clipped authority of an ex-coalition officer. "Ross told us to expect you. Let's see what you've brought." Lore carefully extended a small data cylinder, containing the intel she'd salvaged before her ship was destroyed. "We believe it proves that omnitech, and possibly other conglomerates, have infiltrated both sides' military operations. They're prolonging the war for profit." Her voice still carried traces of pain, but it had regained much of its commanding presence. Silva glanced from the data cylinder to Lore's coppery skin and gently glowing eyes betraying her Filiri heritage. There was no overt hostility, only a resigned acceptance that the lines dividing species had grown complicated. "Come inside," she said curtly. "We'll see if we can use your intel to bust omnitech wide open. But know this, if you're lying or if you bring a trouble to my people, I'll personally see you're spaced without a suit." Inside the dome, the rebels had cobbled together a makeshift command center filled with old screens and salvaged alien consoles. Gun racks and crates of medical supplies lined the walls. Cade guided Lore to a nearby seat as one of the medics offered a curt greeting and began checking her vital signs, just in case. Nearby, Silva activated the data cylinder. Streams of code and lines of text scrolled across a central console, and a hush fell over the rebels who gathered to watch. "I recognize these shipping logs," one ex-Dominion officer murmured, a wreath of decorative scars tracing his cheeks. "They match the patterns we saw in the Zarin sector. Supplies disappearing on the Dominion side, reappearing in coalition channels a month later." Silva's artificial eye glowed with an internal lens as she studied the data. Her jaw tightened, an expression Cade recognized as equal parts anger and bitter vindication. "This is more proof than we've ever had. They're not just fueling the war, they're coordinating entire supply lines in secret. Every time we get close to peace, they sabotage it." She looked up, meeting Cade's gaze. "We can use this. The question is whether we can broadcast it wide enough before omnitech smothers the truth." Within hours, Lore and Cade found themselves thrust into the midst of the rebels' bustling preparations. Silva explained how the rebels had been trying to capture omnitech's hidden transmissions for months, but their best slicers had only managed partial decodings. Now, with the data Lore provided, they had a roadmap leading straight to omnitech's heart. The plan was to strike at a secret research station orbiting a dead moon. If the rebels could access omnitech's mainframe there, they might generate an unstoppable broadcast, saturating every coalition and Dominion channel with incontrovertible proof of corporate treachery. "Problem is," added a lean, quiet Filiri female named Salyen, "the station's defenses are rumored to be formidable. Weapons arrays, stealth drones, hired mercenaries. It'll be a one-way trip if we miscalculate." Her glowing blue stripes stood out against her dark jumpsuit, an unspoken testament to how far she traveled from her Dominion upbringing. Cade was helping gather infiltration gear in the storage bay when Lure approached, her footsteps oddly hesitant for someone so used to rigorous discipline. She seemed healthier than she'd been in days, though she still winced on occasion from lingering injuries. "I heard you volunteered us to be on the strike team," she said, searching his expression. He paused, searching for the right words. "We have the most direct knowledge of the data's significance. I know it's dangerous, but we came this far. We can't bow out now." She let out a soft, rueful laugh. You could have left me to die on that wrecked warship. Instead, you saved my life, only for both of us to walk headlong into a death trap. You humans are maddening creatures. Her tone was lightly teasing, yet Cade sensed the deeper currents beneath. This war had shaped them both, forging them in fire. Each day they spent together, they discovered more in common than either would have admitted possible a short time ago. He moved closer, tentatively resting a hand on her upper arm. Are you all right with this? If you'd rather stay behind, I'd understand. Her eyes, silver ringed with faint traces of luminescence, met his. No, I owe my squad that much. If these revelations can prevent more senseless killing, I'll march into the heart of omnitech's defenses myself. They exchanged a faint smile. In another life, they could have been sworn enemies on a battlefield. Now they stood side by side, bound by their shared resolve. Through the open archway, they could hear Silva rallying a group of volunteers, humans and Faleria alike, who were gearing up for the upcoming mission. Some wore well-worn armor bearing scars from countless skirmishes, while others had the haunted expressions of people too young for the burdens of war. Listen up, Silva's voice rose above the clank of weapon checks. We'll split into two teams. One breaches the research station, plants the infiltration rig. The other holds the docking perimeter, ensuring no one escapes. The intel from Lauren Cade suggests Omnitech is moving top-tier technology through that station. We take it, and we blow this war wide open. Cade and Laura shared a meaningful glance. The final piece of this puzzle was falling into place. Past the fear, exhaustion, and uncertainty, a new sense of purpose flickered in Cade's chest. They were about to embark on a mission that could topple the financial powerhouses, fueling endless bloodshed, and maybe, just maybe, give two war-torn species the chance to find peace. The next day found them flying toward the dead moon in a stolen Omnitech transport. The rebels had acquired it in a daring raid weeks ago, and now they used its forged credentials to slip past the heavy surveillance drones in orbit. Commander Silva led one team in the vessel's cockpit, issuing coded clearance phrases to the station's docking control. Meanwhile, Cade, Laura, and Salian huddled in the cargo hold, cramped among smuggled weaponry. Engines rumbled beneath their feet, and the tension was palpable. Laura tested the controls of a device strapped to her forearm, an adapted disruptor rigged with a scattering mod that she had personally modified. Cade checked and rechecked the infiltration rig, an advanced comm scrambler that the rebels' best engineers had fitted into a small metal cylinder. He wiped beads of sweat from his forehead, willing the plan to hold. If they failed, the station's mercenaries and automated defenses would crush them, their efforts buried in some corporate archive. They felt a jolt as the ship docked with an external airlock. Through the bulkhead, muffled voices of the station's personnel drifted, demands for identification. Silva's pilot spoke calmly, feeding them the faked credentials. A tense pause in the red, stretching for what felt like an eternity. Then a hiss of pressurization, access granted. Infiltration team? Go, Silva's voice crackled over the comm. We've got about 10 minutes before they realize we're not on their systems. Move! The cargo ramp lowered into a vast hangar, lined with crates bearing Omnitech's trademark swirl logo. Cade spotted half a dozen armed guards, chatting idly near an unmanned security kiosk. Before the guards could register any threat, Lore raised her disruptor arm and unleashed a diffused pulse. The energy ripple made the guards jolt like marionettes, dropping them to their knees with pained grunts. Salian dashed forward to finish subduing them, employing fluid martial strikes that betrayed her failery training. The infiltration team pressed on, following the station's twisting corridors. With each passing step, they shut down or bypassed security nodes, using codes gleaned from the data they'd stolen. The interior was clinically sterile, each wall adorned with subtle corporate branding, as though war profiteering were simply another commercial enterprise. Glass windows overlooked labs filled with gleaming machines, racks of high-end weapon prototypes, and labs where unidentified, half-assembled mechs glowed under harsh fluorescent lights. Occasionally, they met small patrols, security contractors wearing high-end gear. Lore's disruptor pulses kept them disoriented, while Salian and Cade moved in. Although some of the guards managed to fire a few shots, the infiltration team pressed forward, unrelenting. Adrenaline surged through Cade's veins. Every confrontation reminded him of his old military days. He fought with skill, tempered by the knowledge that ending this conflict meant more than personal survival. Eventually, they reached the door marked mainframe access, authorized personnel only. According to Lore's intelligence, that was where the data lines converged for Omnitech's communications network. Cade hacked the door panel, and it slid open to reveal a cavernous chamber dominated by towering server columns. Pulsing neon lines ran along the floor, connecting the servers in a web of unstoppable computational power. "Seal the door," Lore said, voice tight with urgency. She and Salian began scrambling for the main console. "Cade, get that infiltration rig online. We'll piggyback a broadcast on all Omnitech channels so the entire sector can see their dirty laundry." Cade nodded and rushed to a small sub-terminal near the base of the largest server column. He removed the infiltration rig from its protective casing, hard hammering. Behind him, Sullian barked out updates. "Security lockdown just triggered. They know we're here." Shots thundered against the sealed door, and faint metallic voices called for reinforcements. Cade's hands shook, but he managed to insert the infiltration rig's connector. A swirl of code lit up the terminal screen, revealing a spider web of encrypted lines. Zora's voice came through his comm earpiece, having synced with the rig's interface. "I can assist Cade, routing infiltration protocols now. We must hurry." While the infiltration rig automatically decoded Omnitech's hub, Lore tapped in commands that would broadcast the data not just to Coalition or Dominion channels, but across every major communication relay in the sector. Once the broadcast started, it would be impossible to silence quickly. The station's heavily protected mainframe would actually amplify the message. Omnitech's own robust network turned against itself. Salian called from across the chamber, her posture tense. "They're breaching the door. We need a defense line or we'll be pinned in here." Her gaze darted from Lore's disruptor to Katie's sidearm as rhythmic pounding on the door escalated. Soon the metal would give way. "Almost there," Lore said. Her eyes glowed with renewed luminescence, sweat beading on her brow. "Cade, are we good?" He checked the rig's final countdown. 10 seconds. Hold them off for 10 seconds." The door exploded inward, spraying shards of metal across the chamber floor. Several mercenaries armed with sleek rifles poured in, faces set with professional ruthlessness. Salian sprang into action with predator grace, weaving among them in a rapid flurry of strikes. Lore fired disruptor bursts that scrambled their aim, forcing them to stumble and clutch at their heads. Cade, reeling from the concussive blast, squeezed off measured shots with his sidearm. The air filled with acrid smoke, the hiss of cooling disruptor coils, and the zing of bullets ricocheting off server columns. Everything seemed to happen at once. Alarms blared, the infiltration rig's screen unleashed a final swirl of code, and Zora's voice announced, "Upload complete, broadcasting the data cluster to all known channels." As if answering this digital clarion call, an uproar of automated system messages flitted across the screens, confirming that Omnitech's secrets, proof of arms deals, bribed officials, carefully orchestrated battles, were being unleashed to the entire sector. Cade had no time to relish the victory. More mercenaries stormed in, and the infiltration team found themselves entrenched in an all-out firefight. One of the guards lobbed a shock grenade that rattled Cade's teeth and briefly knocked him into a daze. Gasping, he felt a hand under his arm, helping him up. Lore's eyes glowed fiercely, her markings bright with a deep turquoise hue. "We've done what we came to do," she said, voice ragged. "Now we have to get out." They retreated in formation, firing off bursts of suppressing fire. A console shorted out behind them, spewing sparks that lit the swirling smoke. The clang of boots against metal corridors reverberated. Salian took point, guiding them toward a side passage that was less guarded. It felt like a precarious dash through a war zone, each step hounded by bursts of weapons fire. Automated turrets popped down from the ceiling at one junction, peppering them with laser pulses that seared the air. Hissing in frustration, Lore overloaded them with a disruptor wave, the devices sparking and grinding to a halt. When they finally neared the hangar, they realized the scale of the station's alarm. Klaxons blared, gates slammed shut, and another squad of mercenaries took up position behind overturned crates, trying to block the infiltration team's escape route. Over the station's intercom, a cold, disembodied voice repeated, "Security breach. Yeah, lockdown in effect. All personnel to defensive positions." The infiltration team steeled themselves for one last push. Together, They surged forward, returning fire with unwavering tenacity. Salian leapt onto a crate, tackling one of the mercenaries, while Cade and Lore rained down suppressing fire on the others. A well-timed disruptor shot from Lore clipped a sealed ammo case, causing it to detonate in a deafening burst that scattered the mercenaries. In the chaos, they darted past, hearts pounding like they might burst. Their stolen omnitech transport still sat in the hangar, with Commander Silva's team providing cover fire. "Board now," Silva shouted, her voice echoing through the swirling smoke and strobe-like emergency lights. "Take off at 5!" Cade and Lore raced up the cargo ramp, meeting Salian's triumphant grin. When Silva followed seconds later, the ramp sealed shut and the transport roared to life. Engines flared and the ship sped out of the station's docking ring. Automated turrets tried to lock on, but the pilot jinked sharply, weaving through the perimeter until they shot clear of the station entirely. As the ship soared into open space, the tension inside the hold erupted in ragged cheers. Data had been successfully broadcast. Omnitech's conspiracies were no longer hidden. For now, at least, the infiltration team had survived. Hours later, the stolen transport rendezvoused with the rebel fleet, a sparse collection of retrofitted civilian freighters and a few small corvettes. News of the broadcast spread like a spark on dry tinder. Coalitions of outraged citizens, human and Faleria alike, demanded investigations. Government transmissions called for emergency sessions. Furious delegates clamored to cut ties with Omnitech, who now stood exposed as the profiteer playing both sides. In the cramped confines of the ship's mess hall, Cade, Lore, and the rest of the infiltration team collapsed into seats, drained but elated. Silva walked in, pausing to salute them with a water pouch in hand. "We're getting reports from every major channel," she said, a rare smile creasing her features. "They're calling it the biggest whistleblow in galactic history. Omnitech is denying everything, but the data is too widespread. There's no going back." A hush fell as the magnitude of their accomplishments sank in. The war, which had once seemed like a monolith too vast to ever topple, now quaked under the weight of mass fury. Corrupt officials and generals, complicit in profiteering, were forced to step into the light. Coalitions of rebels and moderates on both sides began organizing ceasefires, pushing for summits to end the bloodshed. In every corner of the star lanes, people dared to speak of peace. Salian set down her rifle and let out a long, trembling breath. "We did it," she whispered, her filigree markings rippling with relief. "After so many battles, it's surreal." Cade's gaze landed on Lore. The faint luminescence of her eyes seemed calmer now, less burdened by grief. A subtle warmth filled his chest as he recalled the day he first found her on that ghostly wreck. She had expected him to kill her, and instead he had made a choice that defied all logic the war had bred. That choice had set them on the path to this moment. "We've come a long way," he murmured, managing a shaky smile. "And there's still more to do. You know how these things work. Big powers will scramble to save face or shift blame. We have to keep pressing until real peace negotiations take root." Lore nodded, shifting closer. "Peace doesn't come easy. We'll have to stay vigilant. But at least now people can see who the real enemy is." In the following weeks, as delegates scrambled to the bargaining table, Cade and Lore found themselves caught up in a whirlwind of events. Skeptics dubbed them naive idealists, yet more voices proclaimed them as living proof that human and Faleria could stand side by side. The rebels championed them, urging both the coalition and the Dominion to listen. Reports came in daily of old battle lines going quiet, forging a new fragile trust. At last, a tenuous armistice was signed. The battered star systems breathed a collective sigh of relief as both governments agreed to investigate Omnitech's dealings and hold accountable those who had profited from the bloodshed. It was merely the first step on a long road of healing, but a step nonetheless. One balmy evening on a neutral station, a place designated for ongoing peace talks, Cade and Lore met beneath a broad viewport overlooking a swirling nebula. They stood side by side in reflective silence, watching the cosmic ballet of stardust. Their shoulders brushed in a quiet intimacy that might have seemed impossible just weeks prior. Lore's coppery skin glowed faintly as she lifted her gaze. "You saved me, Cade," she whispered. "And together we helped save a piece of this galaxy. Maybe it isn't perfect, but it's more than I dared hope for." Cade reached for her hand. "We saved each other." Now, we have a chance to save far more lives than we ever imagined. Their fingers intertwined, and in that simple, unguarded moment, the swirling stars beyond the viewport seemed less like a cold expanse of endless conflict and more like a promise of infinite possibility. Looking back on everything they've endured, from the abandoned warship where Cade saved Lore's life, to the daring infiltration that exposed galactic corruption, a single lesson stands clear. Compassion and cooperation can triumph over the darkest manipulations. With omnitech schemes laid bare and official peace talks underway, an era of healing dawns for two civilizations once locked in endless battle. From my perspective, their shared journey shows that even the smallest act of kindness can spark monumental change. If you've enjoyed this story, please leave a comment below with your own thoughts and theories. I'd love to hear how you think these characters might shape the future of their galaxy. Remember to subscribe and stay tuned for more tales that celebrate courage, unity, and the power of hope.